April 1943, North Africa. The warm spring sun bathes the rolling hills of Tunisia, yet the air hangs heavy with the scent of smoke and death. At this pivotal moment, just as the tide of war is about to turn irreversibly, Allied reconnaissance troops, stumbling through an olive grove, encounter a scene that defies belief. There, beneath the twisted, gnarled branches of the olive trees, quietly lurks a beast of steel. It is not burning, it is not smoking, even the mud on its tracks looks undisturbed. This is a German Tiger tank, hull number 712, the most feared killing machine on the battlefields of World War II. But right now, it resembles a sleeping lion. It is so pristine that the soldiers can hardly believe their eyes. With fingers tight on their triggers and cold sweat soaking their backs, the Allied troops approach cautiously. For they are standing face to face with the very definition of invincibility in their era. Yet, when they climb onto the massive armor and throw open the hatch, they are greeted only by an empty fighting compartment. No booby traps, no demolition charges, even the precision gun sights are perfectly intact. This 60-ton fortress of steel was simply abandoned by its crew, complete and operational. What force could possibly compel a crew of battle-hardened German tankers to walk away from their most powerful weapon without firing a single shot? The answer lies not in its thick armor, nor in the terrifying 88mm main gun, but in a detail so mundane that military experts initially found it absurd: the fuel tank. Welcome back to our channel. Today, through the legendary journey of this specific Tiger tank, number 712, we will uncover the deadliest and most overlooked truth behind the annihilation of the German Panzer forces. This is not just a story about a captured weapon, it is a deep dive into the logic of war, industrial design, and a catastrophic strategic gamble. This tank, labeled by Allied intelligence officers as the most valuable prize of the North African campaign, will use its cold, hard data to tell us a brutal fact. On the battlefield, sometimes what defeats you is not the enemy's fire, but your own non-fillable appetite. Let us turn the clock back to May 1943, the darkest hour for the Axis powers in Africa. Between May 7th and 13th, approximately 230,000 German and Italian soldiers laid down their arms in Tunisia. The Afrika Corps, as an organized fighting force, effectively ceased to exist. Among this vast column of prisoners were a unique group of men, the survivors of the German 501st Heavy Panzer Battalion. They were the elite of the elite, equipped with the most advanced land weapon of the time, the Tiger tank. As early as late November 1942, Tigers began arriving in Tunisia. 3 Tigers from the 501st stepped onto the desert sands on November 23rd, marking the debut of this heavy tank in North Africa. Subsequently, through December and January, more Tigers arrived via perilous sea transports, eventually bringing the operational strength here to 20 vehicles. While this number sounds small, in that specific time and space, the name Tiger alone was enough to cast a massive psychological shadow over Allied soldiers. This fear was not unfounded. Soviet forces had already tasted the power of these monsters near Leningrad. In January 1943, Red Army reports were filled with shock and helplessness. These vehicles could destroy medium tanks at ranges exceeding 2,000 meters. They were equipped with the famous 88mm gun, a weapon originally designed for anti-aircraft defense, which, when adapted for anti-tank warfare, displayed devastating penetration power. It could tear through the frontal armor of a Sherman tank like paper from distances where the Allied tank couldn't even hope to retaliate. Defensively, the Tiger was akin to a god. In early February 1943, U.S. forces received their first detailed intelligence reports on German super heavy tanks via British channels. For American soldiers accustomed to facing Panzer IIIs and IVs, the descriptions read like science fiction, weighing over 55 tons. With frontal armor exceeding 100 millimeters and a main gun capable of killing from 2 kilometers away, many American tankers dismissed this as British exaggeration or battlefield rumor until reality delivered a brutal slap to the face. On February 14, 1943, German forces launched Operation Spring Breeze, attacking American positions at the F-Aid Pass in central Tunisia. Units of the 21st Panzer Division, supported by Tigers of the 501st Heavy Panzer Battalion, stormed the U.S. 1st Armored Division. The following 2 days, February 14th and 15th, known as the Battle of Sidi Bouzid, ID, became a nightmare for American armor. In this decisive engagement, the Tiger demonstrated its absolute authority as the ruler of the battlefield. When Panzer come and C launched a counterattack on February 15th with 52 tanks, those lumbering yet lethal Tigers were among them. Allied shells struck the Tiger's armor, making harmless clanging sounds as they ricocheted off, while every roar of a Tiger's 88mm gun was accompanied by the explosion and burning of a Sherman. When the Germans withdrew, they left behind 50 to destroyed American tanks, 46 of which were total losses. Post-battle analysis revealed that only one Sherman had managed to score a lucky hit on a Tiger. At point-blank range, it was a massacre. The painful lesson of this battle caused Tiger phobia to spread like a plague through American ranks. Frontline Army medical officers solemnly recorded this psychological symptom, the mere sound of tracks, or the mention of the word Tiger in a report, would cause American units to freeze before an attack, frantically calling for air support and heavy artillery barrages. The tactical value of this psychological deterrence far outweighed the actual number of Tigers. After all, across the entire North African theater, the number of Tigers was extremely limited. Yet, in the eyes of American soldiers, it seemed a Tiger was hiding behind every sand dune. However, just as this fear reached its peak, the scales of war were quietly tipping on the compass of logistics. By March 1943, although the Tiger remained invincible in local engagements, the Germans faced an enemy far more terrifying than Allied artillery, mechanical failure, and fuel shortages. The war diary of the 501st Battalion began to read like a tragedy. Records from December 1940 showed 20 Tigers available for combat. Upon arrival by December 28th, only 14 were mobile, with 8 immobilized by mechanical issues and a lack of spare parts. It was ironic. The most powerful weapon had the most fragile heart. By January 30, 1943, only 11 Tigers were operational, and the phrase fuel shortage began appearing frequently in the logs. This situation grew dire as the war turned against them. Every Tiger required a constant stream of fuel, oil, and parts, yet Germany's supply lines to North Africa had been strangled by Allied naval and air power. By March, only 6 Tigers were combat ready. The rest had become expensive scrap metal, sitting quietly in repair depots waiting for parts that would never arrive. That sense of despair peaked in the records of April 20th. Allied offensives surged like a tidal wave, breaching all German lines. Retreat orders were issued, but for those Tigers with empty fuel tanks, retreat was mission impossible. It was against this backdrop that Tiger 7-1 met its end, its crew facing overwhelming Allied pressure. And watching the fuel gauge drop to 0 made their final choice abandon ship. This colossal war machine halted quietly in that olive grove near Tunis. Its 88mm gun still pointed toward the horizon, but it would never roar again. The crew fled in such haste that they set no charges. It didn't even drop a grenade into the engine bay as was standard procedure. They left this masterpiece of Greater German engineering completely intact for the Allies. This discovery sent the British intelligence team into ecstasy. Experts from the Royal Electrical and Mechanical Engineers rushed to the scene to conduct a preliminary examination of Tiger 712. The report showed that the tank was not only outwardly undamaged, but internally fully functional. There was no evidence that the crew had attempted to sabotage the vehicle. All systems were operational. This was quite literally a gift from God. The British Technical Intelligence team immediately realized the immense value of this find. It was the legendary dissection specimen. Through this intact Tiger, they could conduct a complete technical review of Germany's most advanced heavy tank. The engine could be stripped and tested, the transmission structure examined, the armor composition measured, and the gun test-fired. Most importantly, this vehicle could be driven and operated to determine its actual combat capabilities and, crucially, its limitations. British engineers conducted basic functional tests right there in Tunisia. They were astonished to find that the massive Maybach engine still turned over. The gearbox shifted smoothly, the steering was responsive, the turret rotated freely, the main gun elevated steadily, and the hydraulic systems maintained good pressure. This tank was indeed fully mission-capable, suffering from no hard damage. British intelligence officers immediately notified their American counterparts. The U.S. Army Intelligence Service had been desperately searching for an intact Tiger for in-depth analysis, and they reached a joint agreement with the British as part of technical intelligence cooperation. Tiger 712 would be shipped to the United States for deep evaluation. This was an unprecedented logistical operation, and the first test for the 60-ton monster. Moving a heavy tank from Tunisia to the U.S. required massive coordination. The vehicle had to be prepped for transport, hoisted onto a ship, sail across a submarine-infested Atlantic, and be unloaded at a U.S. port. The war machine finally arrived in late August and was transported by rail to the Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland. This transport operation itself demonstrated the Allies' robust logistical capability, in stark contrast to Germany's stretched capacity in North Africa. Transporting a 60-ton tank across an ocean required the Allies to build and maintain incredibly complex infrastructure. Germany, meanwhile, couldn't even provide basic fuel to its tanks on the front lines. This point was evident from the captured Tiger itself. Its failure was not just tactical, but a strategic, logistical failure. In September 1943, testing at Aberdeen Proving Ground officially began. The Ordnance Department conducted technical evaluations on all captured enemy equipment, but Tiger 712 represented the most valuable prize to date. Previous assessments had focused on Panzer III, and for medium tanks, the Tiger represented a completely different class of vehicle. Thicker armor, heavier weaponry, and vastly larger dimensions. The test plan was comprehensive and systematic. Every system would be evaluated individually. Engine performance, fuel consumption, mechanical reliability, armor protection, weapons performance, optics, ergonomics, maintenance requirements, and every other measurable parameter were to be recorded. The first phase of testing focused on automotive performance and fuel consumption. This was the critical moment. The Tiger was powered by a Maybach HL to 10 P45 V12 gasoline engine, rated at 650 horsepower. This engine drove an 8-speed transmission. To power the 60-ton behemoth, initial road tests were conducted on Aberdeen test tracks. Engineers measured fuel consumption under various conditions, including highway driving, cross-country travel, simulated urban terrain, and combat maneuvering. The results were shocking, even desperate. Even American engineers, who were aware of German engineering tendency toward complexity, were stunned by the data. Under ideal conditions, driving on hard, improved roads at optimal speeds, Tiger 712 achieved approximately 0.3 miles per gallon. This meant it burned a gallon of gas to go less than 500 meters. With a 120-gallon fuel tank, its theoretical range under absolutely ideal conditions was about 36 miles, or less than 60 kilometers. But that was just theory. The reality of the battlefield is far from ideal. Moving off-road, the vehicle had to contend with desert terrain, hills, soft soil, and obstacles. Under these conditions, tests showed fuel consumption increased 3 to 4 times. Off-road, Tiger 712 achieved roughly 0.1 miles per gallon, 160 meters per gallon. But it gets worse. Under simulated high-intensity combat conditions involving frequent speed changes, steering maneuvers, turret rotation, and pushing the engine to full power, fuel consumption reached astronomical levels. In combat simulations, the Tiger got about 0.08 miles per gallon. A gallon of fuel moved the tank only about 120 meters. A full tank of gas, under these conditions, provided a range of only about 10 miles, less than 16 kilometers. The implications of these numbers were staggering. A tank that can only travel 10 miles in combat conditions requires a constant, unbroken supply of fuel to remain effective. Germany's logistics in North Africa simply could not meet this demand, especially with Allied air power dominating the skies and systematically attacking supply routes. The test report detailed the relationship between fuel consumption and combat conditions. Light off-road maneuvering, equivalent to traversing moderate North African terrain, dropped fuel economy from the ideal's 0.3 MPG to about 0.15 MPG, giving a range of 18 miles on a full 120-gallon tank. High-intensity combat maneuvering was even worse. The Aberdeen report had immediate strategic significance for Allied commanders. While the Tiger tank was tactically terrifying, strategically it was incredibly fragile because of its massive thirst for fuel. Any operation disrupting German fuel supplies would directly cripple the Tiger's combat capability far more effectively than trying to destroy them in direct combat. The conclusion of the report was clear: the Tiger tank's rate of fuel consumption rendered it nearly impossible to sustain in prolonged mobile warfare. Without near-perfect logistical support Germany could not provide in any theater. This explained why so many Tigers were found abandoned in Tunisian olive groves. They weren't defeated, they starved to death. The final test report, completed in October 1943, provided a comprehensive technical assessment. This 400-plus page document detailed every aspect of the Tiger tank. The chapter on fuel consumption had a particularly profound impact on post-war tank design. The report noted that German engineers, in designing the Tiger, had clearly prioritized tactical performance over operational sustainability. The 650 horsepower engine provided acceptable performance for a 60-ton vehicle, but at the cost of fuel consumption levels that no existing combat vehicle could sustain. By comparison, the American Sherman medium tank, weighing 30 tons with a 400 horsepower engine, achieved about 0.7 miles per gallon. With a 140-gallon capacity, the Sherman had a range of about 100 miles. Under combat conditions, the Sherman could still manage about 0.4 miles per gallon, a range of roughly 56 miles. The numbers spoke for themselves. The Sherman could travel 56 miles in combat, the Tiger could travel 12. The Sherman could conduct deep penetrations, pursue retreating enemies, and engage in maneuver warfare. The Tiger was tethered to a short leash, limited to short movements within the reach of its fuel supply. The detailed technical analysis of Tiger 712 provided the foundation for Allied tactical development to counter the German heavy tank advantage. It also proved there was no need to build an equally heavy tank to fight it. The report demonstrated that mobility and operational endurance were more valuable than pure armor protection and firepower. The Aberdeen report influenced the direction of American tank design, rather than attempting to build a heavy tank to go toe-to-toe with the Tiger. U.S. engineers focused on producing medium tanks with reliable mechanical performance, good mobility, and sustainable operational range. The Sherman embodied this philosophy, though inferior in firepower and armor to the Tiger. It excelled in reliability, fuel economy, and ease of maintenance. The strategic decision was to produce thousands of reliable medium tanks, rather than hundreds of capable but breakdown-prone heavy tanks. This decision was based partly on the lesson of Tiger 712. A tactically superior weapon has no strategic value if it cannot stay in the fight. After the war, the testing of Tiger 712 became a classic case study in armored warfare education. It taught how not to design a tank without regard for logistical constraints. German engineers created a tactical masterpiece, but ignored operational reality. The result was a tank that could dominate any single engagement, but could not sustain a campaign. The U.S. Army Armor School used Tiger 7.1 extensively in its curriculum. The tank itself was displayed for students. The left side of the hull and turret were cut away to allow inspection of internal components. The real lesson wasn't in the hardware, it was in the design philosophy. The Tiger embodied a philosophy that prioritized tactical stats over operational sustainability. German engineers knew the Tiger would consume massive amounts of fuel. They knew logistics would be challenging. But military leadership demanded the thickest armor and the biggest gun, regardless of the logistical consequences. The result was a weapon that won battles but lost wars. The Tiger's fuel consumption became a prominent teaching case in post-war military education. The U.S. Army Command and General Staff College used it extensively in logistics courses to illustrate a fundamental principle. No matter the tactical performance, a weapon that cannot be sustained in combat is not an effective weapon. Despite its genuine tactical advantages, the Tiger proved this principle through thousands of examples across the European theater. Superior tactical performance without logistical sustainability equals strategic failure. Tiger 7.1 served as a training exhibit at Aberdeen Proving Ground until 1989. For 46 years, it stood as a physical reminder of the importance of logistics. In armored warfare, the tank that terrified Allied crews in 1943 became the classroom to teaching the critical relationship between tactical capability and strategic sustainability. Generations of American armor officers studied it, learning how to balance firepower, protection, and mobility with sustainable logistics. In 1989, Tiger 7.1 was loaned to Germany for restoration and display. It eventually returned to the U.S. and is currently housed in the U.S. Army Armor and Cavalry Collection at Fort Moore, Georgia. Formerly Fort Benning, having previously been displayed at the Patton Museum in Fort Knox, Kentucky, the cutaways on the hull and turret remain. Exposing its innards to students, it stands as both a monument and a teacher representing German engineering excellence that ignored the constraints of operational sustainability. The capture and testing of Tiger 7.1 provided intelligence that fundamentally shaped Allied tank tactics. Throughout the remainder of World War II, American tankers learned that the fearsome Tiger had a weakness far more significant than any flaw in its armor scheme. Its rate of fuel consumption made sustained maneuvering nearly impossible in the face of the Allied air blockade and systematic attacks on the German supply chain. Knowing this weakness allowed the Allies to develop effective counter-tactics, neutralizing the Tiger's advantages. Without needing equal armor or firepower, the knowledge of the Tiger's thirst influenced U.S. tank design for decades. The Patton tanks developed in the 1950s, though weighing 47 tons and armed with powerful 90mm guns, achieved over 1 mile per gallon. U.S. engineers remembered that mobility fundamentally depends on fuel efficiency. And fuel efficiency requires disciplined engineering choices among competing requirements. The lessons learned from Tiger 7.1 ensured that operational range remained a key design parameter for all subsequent U.S. armored vehicles. Modern main battle tanks continue the tradition of balancing firepower, protection, and mobility with sustainable logistics. The Moen Abrams, introduced in 1980, carries over 500 gallons of fuel, achieving about 0.6 miles per gallon, giving it an operational road range of over 300 miles, despite being a 70-ton vehicle powered by a gas turbine. The Abrams retains sufficient range for deep strikes and maneuver warfare. Designers ensured that even the most powerful tank could go the distance. This is partly the legacy of Tiger 7.1. Its story illustrates that superior weapons require sustainable logistics to achieve strategic effects. When the world's most powerful tanks It's as a sitting duck waiting for a fuel truck that will never arrive. It becomes useless. The Allies ruthlessly and effectively exploited this weakness. The final assessment belongs to Colonel George Jarrett, who oversaw the evaluation of all captured German equipment during and after the war. His summary assessment, written in June 1945, encapsulated 3 years of testing and analysis. The German Tiger tank achieved everything its designers promised tactically. It offered superior armor protection, devastating long-range firepower, and excellent crew safety, but it failed strategically because it violated a fundamental military principle: any weapon and system must be sustainable over extended combat operations. The Tiger's fuel consumption, mechanical complexity, and extraordinary logistical demands made it ultimately unsustainable in a long war. Germany built an army of weapons it could not adequately support. The Tiger embodied this failure perfectly. Brilliant tactical capability cannot overcome inadequate strategic logistics. The Tiger proved this truth through thousands of burning and abandoned hulks. Scattered across Europe, from Tunisia to Normandy, from the Ardennes to Berlin, Tiger 7 won to rest quietly today in a climate-controlled facility at Fort Moore, Georgia. Its 88mm gun is forever silent. The Maybach engine that once greedily devoured fuel will never run again. But the lessons it teaches continue to echo in every arm or school, every logistics course, and every staff college. Studying modern mechanized warfare, these principles are timeless and universal. The tank that struck fear into Allied hearts in 1943 became the teacher that shaped modern armored doctrine, not through its formidable strengths, but through its greatest weakness. The Tiger could dominate any single battlefield with superior fire and protection, but it could not reach distant battlefields. It could not sustain extended operations far from supply bases, and it could not survive the systematic fuel starvation imposed on German forces by Allied air power and logistical targeting. This is the story of Tiger 712, a tale of fear, conquest, scientific analysis, and ultimate strategic realization. It tells us that war is not just a collision of steel, but a confrontation of systems. When we gaze upon these silent steel behemoths in museums, let us not forget that victory and defeat are often decided by invisible pipelines and the ticking numbers on a fuel gauge. If you enjoyed today's video, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. I am your strategy observer, and I will see you on the next battlefield.